for the February 9th Planning Commission meeting. First, the review of Zoom procedures, though I think everyone here is aware of them, so we don't need to do so.
We do have to do introductions for planning commissioners that are online.
Thank you, Mike. So if those online would be so kind as to introduce yourself.
Sean Lenahan, Planning Commissioner.
Rowan Hawthorne, Planning Commissioner.
Gabe Lajeunesse, Planning Commissioner.
Thanks, everyone. Next agenda item is the approval of the agenda. Unless there's any additions or edits anyone has, I ask for unanimous consent to approve it. Hearing no proposed changes, the agenda is approved. Next is consideration of the January 12th, 2026 meeting minutes. Take a minute to take a look at those.
You have that?
I do. Again, unless there's any proposed edits or changes, I'd ask for unanimous consent, but I'll give you guys a minute to take a look at it.
Your traffic delay is got it.
I would just say that the formatting, that basically the bulk of what's written here should be up under the update on planning projects.
So what's your proposed change, just so we...
So it says, continue work on new zoning amendment, but then it talks about things that should be under the update on planning project.
I see that. Okay.
That's a good catch. Yeah,
Okay.
Looks like the continue work should be down where it has discussion and review of chapter
Right.
320.
Right. Okay.
But the actual content, I think, is fine.
Yep. Thanks. Well, it looks like there needs to be a change, so I'm looking for a motion from someone.
I will motion to make those amendments
Thanks.
and accept it.
There's a second.
I will say.
Great. Any discussion? No. Those in favor of the approving the minutes with the changes that Sean outlined, please say aye.
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 Any nays? Minutes are approved. Next is comments from the commission. I just a very quick note. This is a change that Maria and I made to the agenda item before the agenda went out. Previously, it was the comments of the chair. I wanted to change that to just say basically comments from the commission. Just an opportunity for anybody here, any of the commissioners, to talk about anything that they want to. I think was kind of silly that we would limit that to just the chair. But to kick that off, Maria and I had a brief meeting with the housing committee last week. They reached out to us to have an informal discussion, and I'll hand it over to Maria to sort of bring you guys up to speed on what that discussion was about.
Okay, we met with Alyssa Shurin, who seems to be the new chair. If you guys remember, there's a kind of like a mass resignation last year. Tim Heaney and Sandra Vitsum. Alyssa's the chair. I'm not sure if Tim and Sandra are.
They're just
members.
Yep.
So they wanted to meet with us because they wanted to see how much interest the Planning Commission had in really rethinking the zoning regulations. I think the phrase like throw the whole thing out came up at one point. So like, kind of like a big picture. But what I thought was interesting is that Alyssa already seems to be going around talking to city council, talking with Mike. Is that true? That you've met with her too?
Met with her.
And I can't think of what other interested parties that she may have already met with. But Aaron and I think basically said that, of course, the planning commission is willing to think big, but that we aren't the arbiters of what actually gets passed. And so, we're willing to do as much as we can, given the political climate. But there was this discussion of, I forget what she called it. They're kind of like doing a simulation in the planning department, going through what it takes for a developer to actually get something developed. And we told Tim that that's actually very helpful to hear like these like real world scenarios, and that I think it also helps convince people that change is needed in these, some parts. But I guess she did offer also to send along some language from other cities. So we'll see. But we wanted to keep them apprised of what we're doing, let them apprise us of what they are doing, just make it more of a communication between the two committees.
Yep, and I would just say, it was a pretty informal discussion. It was more of an introduction to the two groups. With that being said, they are starting a fairly significant push to start working on issues in their wheelhouse. And I think Alyssa made it pretty clear that they're kind of trying to get that hitting the ground running. And so the outreach was to sort of see, given where we are with finally wrapping up the city plan and moving into this larger sort of more granular look at the zoning regulations. This was sort of an opportunity to see if there was an opportunity for the two groups to collaborate going forward, as sort of, I think what I at least conveyed to them is, obviously when a lot of the public comments that we got in the city planning process was, it really highlighted the primacy of, encouraging housing in the city. So to the extent that anything that we're looking at here with, we're looking at the regs, and sort of how that might dovetail into some of their work. I think it's a good opportunity to keep in contact with them. And they offered sort of two kind of concrete things to us. Number one was what we ended up calling like a life cycle analysis of a project as a way to sort of contextualize, hypothetical or real projects sort of from, kind of conception through execution, and where those rub up against, those projects rub up against our zoning regulations, to sort of give us a better understanding of like where the rubber really meets the road. And the second sort of thing that they offered was to forward some sort of examples of maybe other municipalities and how they've approached sort of zoning regulations, sort of vis-a-vis their pursuit of additional housing. So we haven't gotten anything from them. We don't expect to get anything from them for a while, but we'll obviously, the idea was this is just kind of an opening conversation. We'll keep the, lines of communication open. And what I guess I would ask this group is if anybody is interested in working maybe more collaboratively and with the housing committee, it might be a good idea or an opportunity for somebody, at least one person here, to sort of keep closer tabs on what they're doing, and see if there's, opportunities for us to work together moving forward. And I'm not suggesting that anybody does that, but again, that's maybe an opportunity to think about. So again, it was a good conversation. Nothing very concrete came out of it, but again, it was sort of just a welcome sort of conversation with that group. And obviously we'll certainly hear from them again. And if anybody's interested in working more closely with them, let us know. And I think it'd be a great opportunity given where we are.
Do they meet at a regular cadence?
Yeah, they meet once a month. I think it's the first Tuesday of Mike, you would.
I think it's first Tuesday.
First Tuesday.
Definitely Tuesday.
Yeah.
I think it's first Tuesday.
Yeah, but they only meet once a month. But there's a number of the former city council member, at least one on the committee. There's some pretty dedicated folks as far as I could tell. There's two, I think, former city councilors that are on that group. So I think they're really trying to be focused and move forward pretty aggressively.
I think collaboration sounds amazing. I mean, we're so overlapping with and yeah, focus. I'm just curious a little bit, like what does collaboration look like? In my opinion, I think having a single person, present at their meetings or some of their meetings, it sounds great. But I'd love for even a larger collaboration. Does that look like them joining us here as the design review commission did? Opportunities like that. Like we are in it right now with zoning. Well, we're in the learning phase of zoning, but in the sense that like right now, starting now would be amazing.
And we talked at very high level.
Yeah.
Timeline, and we communicated that, which is we are still in the sort of review phase.
Totally.
And once we start sort of thinking about how to put pen to paper, we would probably ramp up our communication, but they had offered, at some point, it might be a good idea to have them come here or vice versa, and really sort of regular check-ins. I think the other concept that we did talk about, which I think is instructive for us, is they are having fairly regular contact with city councilors as they move along. And I feel like when we start to move towards making decisions about how we want to make changes here, it's helpful to think about how do we communicate that to city council, have regular check-ins with them, sort of take their temperature. So that was a helpful sort of reminder that we could be having that communication as well, so that we can, be a little more nimble in terms of being responsive to city councilor concerns as we move forward.
For sure.
Anything else you want to? I can't remember anything else.
They did say it, we talked about April 1st, like having them send us comments and suggested edits to the zoning around then. I mean, I'm sure it'll be much more of a back and forth process, but April 1st is kind of the date that we thought might make sense for like initial comments.
Okay. And so again, this is an opportunity for any other commissioners to just make comments about any issue that's on their mind. So if anybody has anything, feel free to speak up. Okay. Moving on is general business. This is for comments from the public about anything not on the agenda. We have Steve Whitaker is with us today. So Steve, I'm sure you have comments.
Gonna pass these two things around just so that can be acquainted with them. I'm not going into them too deeply, but my comments relate more to so I'm gonna be blunt because I never am otherwise. Because the Country Club Road site has been allowed to sit in a state of planning limbo for far too long, and the Planning Commission bears responsibility for that. This is not about personalities. It's all about the commission's abdication of its statutory role while critical decisions are being made elsewhere by staff, by consultants, and now by developers without the planning foundation that's legally and professionally required. Aaron, I need you to listen, pay attention. Let me ground this in history because that's where the pattern becomes clear. For years, Sabin's Pasture, I would say decades, but it's treated as one of Montpelier's primary growth aspirational sites. It was inside the growth center. It was outside known brownfields. A TIF district was created, which included Sabin's Pasture. Property owners and stakeholders developed reliance on that framework. Reliance the city actively encouraged, and that's legal reliance, actionable reliance. Then in 2022, the city dissolved the TIF district. That decision extinguished financing opportunity and left Sabin's Pasture stranded. What matters most is what did not happen next. There was no replacement plan, no updated growth center strategy that met statutory requirements, and no master planning reset. Instead, city staff pivoted attention to Country Club Road, a contaminated site, without an adopted master plan, without a traffic study, without completed brownfield delineation, and without resolving Act 250 jurisdiction. That's where the Planning Commission should have stepped in. It did not. In June of 2023, Whitenberg delivered a so-called actionable plan. It was explicit. The concepts were illustrative only and contingent upon a future phase 2, Chapter 117 compliant planning process. I'm inferring that Chapter 117 compliant because that's the only one we're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be managing it. That process never occurred. Instead, those concepts were abandoned and replaced with vague density bubble diagrams by the Country Club Road Subcommittee appointed by the council that removed roads, infrastructure, environmental constraints, and permitting realities from view. Those diagrams are not planning. They're placeholders pretending to be decisions. And yet, based on those placeholders, the city has issued an RFP to developers, told developers that Act 250 is likely not an issue. Same with traffic, pursued large federal grants and continues to, and asked the city council to keep spending money as if the fundamentals are settled. They are not. State GIS mapping shows that the Act 181 Growth Center buffer does not extend to cover the water, sewer, and road infrastructure serving Country Club Road. That's the blue shaded bubble on there. That means Act 250 jurisdiction presumptively applies. A jurisdictional opinion has not been issued or even requested by the city. Treating Act 250 as off the table is not optimism. It is false. The same is true for traffic. Evaluating only the first 20 plus acres of a 130-acre parcel is not a traffic impact analysis. Traffic must be based on a full build-out: housing, civic, recreational uses, emergency access, and Route 2 impacts. Without that, no cost-benefit analysis is valid, and no federal grant reviewer will take it seriously. Then there's the brownfield. Roads and buildings cannot be responsibly located until contamination is fully delineated and a corrective action plan is complete. That is not debatable. Planning has been reversed. Lines drawn first, hazards addressed later, maybe. We have not even, our regional commission has not applied to the EPA for brownfield funding yet on behalf of Montpelier. Montpelier has not contracted for a work plan for Stone Environmental to continue the delineation. They've done no depth delineation. Now we're talking about funding, because this is where the ethical failure becomes obvious. The city originally pursued CDBG-DR funds, as you can see in your minutes from your last meeting, which don't require, but encourage a disaster recovery nexus and substantial low and moderate income housing outcomes. Recently circulated materials for this Wednesday city council meeting nearly brag that the new strategy, pursue build funds from DOT, is preferable because it has no low and moderate income requirement. That should alarm this commission. The absence of a low and moderate income requirement is not a benefit. It's a confession that affordable housing goals have been sidelined. That this contradicts the purpose for which this land was acquired and the commitments repeatedly made to the Housing Committee, and I would argue the former Housing Committee before you've heard the story, and to the public. And let's be clear, the city plan, which this commission approved, explicitly calls for developing upland areas outside flood hazard zones to support vital community functions before, during, and after future disasters. Country Club Road could serve that role, but only if it's planned honestly and comprehensively from the start. Right now, it's not even being discussed. What we have instead is undue deference to staff judgment and manipulation of the planning process, unchecked and expensive consultant momentum, and a commission that has allowed itself to be bypassed. To date, the city has already spent or proposed roughly $450,000 on Country Club Road. Approximately $256,000 paid to Whitenberg, BHP, and Black River Design and related work in 2023, plus roughly $200,000 more proposed or committed for the RFP process, BHP Engineering, Whitenberg again, and $26,000, I believe, is on Wednesday's agenda to pay VHB to fill out a build grant application. that will be money flushed down the toilet because we are in no way qualified or ready for that build application. And y'all should be aware of it and know that and advise the council by Wednesday on that topic. For nearly $500,000, the city could have produced a serious Chapter 117 compliant master plan for Country Club Road. Instead, it continues to spend public money on speculative processes without traffic analysis, Act 250 clarity, or a completed brownfield plan. At some point, delay becomes complicity. That's exactly the kind of outcome the Planning Commission exists to prevent. You cannot keep deferring foundational planning while telling the public and developers that the city is, quote, ready. And you cannot allow grant applications to substitute for planning. And you cannot tolerate representations that are contradicted by the city's own data. So I'll close with this. The Planning Commission has two choices: reassert its role, require a real master plan for Country Club Road, go through the process of adopting that, having the city council adopt it and the regional planning commission adopt it, resolve Act 250 jurisdiction, reassert its role, insist on a real capital budget and program. And I would encourage you not just to talk with the housing committee, but engage with the Complete Streets Committee, because almost everything they care about involves capital budgeting. And this is the body that's supposed to be doing capital budget and program, a 5-year program, not abdicating that to whoever the city wants to appoint. It's statutory, this body's task. Integrate brownfield and traffic constraints and restore lawful public process, or acknowledge it's no longer functioning as the city's planning body and step aside for those who will do the work. Country Club Road and Montpelier's affordability, resilience, and integrity are too important for drift, too expensive for fiction, and too dangerous for continued abdication. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Anybody have any questions about those two maps? One is soils, prime ag soils, which Mike is committed to ignoring.
Prime ag soils here,
Yep.
statewide soils here.
Yep.
And I'm curious about the extent of brownfield and the mapping of brownfield, and
It's preliminary, it's mapped.
where do we access that information?
You
Is that
can
something-
ask Nick for the GIS data, although they're claiming litigation exemption for me, which won't hold up. But they have all the GIS data of the mapping and the test zones, but again,
They're all
it's been
at the
delineated
Country
for
Club
depth.
Road
Excuse me,
website.
don't interrupt me. It hasn't been delineated for depth, and there's a required second tier of the phase 2 environmental site assessment, which will find out the implication in groundwater, which is probably not expected to be human impact, but more biota impact.
Okay.
And, but we've continued to recklessly violate the I rule, and as recently as last Sunday, build bonfires sucking contaminated soil into the air with no approval from the commissioner, which is required for everything we've done up there.
Did you talk to the folks that were running that program on Sunday?
I did not, I didn't go. I wasn't gonna risk my breath. Thank you.
I have one other question.
Sure.
The Act 250 boundary,
Yep.
and where's that map from?
That map is created off the GIS website at ANR,
Okay.
and by selecting, they used to have a buffer, the Act 181 buffers on the ACCD version. Somebody disappeared that. But I found that by going into the natural resources section, selecting Sabin's pasture, which is in the growth center, and then the buffer off of that parcel, I was able to create that map.
You calculated that buffer?
No, I didn't calculate it. I just turned on the buffer layer while Sabin's pasture was selected.
Okay. Just trying to see if I can.
You're trying to impeach me, but that's okay.
No, I'm trying to recreate it.
Yeah, you can do that exactly same way I just did.
Excellent. There's no impeaching that's happening here. It's just getting up to speed. Mike, did you have? I would love to hear. You were talking about brownfields, and I would love to hear.
We could take most of the rest of the meeting for you
Okay.
to rebut everything that's in there.
No,
but-
yeah,
No, I was just saying the brownfield map that you were asking about, there's the Country Club Road site, webpage on our website, and it has all of the information, including the documents that include those maps.
Great. I will jump into there as well. Thank you.
Okay. Next agenda item is the update on the city planning projects. Mike, do you have any updates?
Still doing a lot of work on, we've got a lot of grants and projects going on. As Steve mentioned, we are still working the Community Development Block Grant, Disaster Recovery, CDBG-DR. That application is, it's going to be a $5 million application, thereabouts, 5.2 million, I believe. And that is going to be due at the end of the month. And that application, so we're still working with, we put in the pre-application, we had a meeting with the state, and they had revised some of their recommendations. So that's part of the reason we're going back to city council. So it increased from 18 to about 24. There are some other conditions that are in there for DR, which makes this the big picture for Country Club Road is we purchased the property and we're trying to take care of a lot of the costs, the infrastructure costs through grants or through CHIP. So that way it would enable the development of affordable housing, affordable with a little a, not subsidized housing. But if we reduce those costs, we could build housing that is more affordable to workforce type housing. Because the reason why housing really hasn't been developed in Washington County is the fact that building costs, construction costs are so high and our rents are not high enough. If you go to Chittenden County, the rents are high enough that it makes financial sense to make those investments. And it hasn't made sense for Montpelier. So by bringing those costs down, that was the intent. As we increase the LMI requirement, you start ending up putting in an unfunded, basically an unfunded mandate on the developer to go through and say, all right, we're not going to give you any money, but you got to give us 24 LMI housing units. That could cost them $8 million. Well, for $8 million, they could have bought the site and put in the roads themselves. So as the costs increase, it's not that we don't want the LMI, it's that those costs are going to start they've got to build those costs into their projects. And so it's not so much so that we're not going to apply, but what we did learn was that there's a second grant opportunity that's a build grant from the Department of Transportation. We did some homework, reached out to folks about the viability of that project, and it actually has gotten a very strong positive response from the grant writers who said this is actually a pretty good project and has a high likelihood. We can never guarantee anything. I'm just saying better than 50-50. How much better than 50-50? I don't know, but it's for the amount of money to get $5 million in funding, that would not have the strings attached that the other one does. So it's just could have a little bit more advantage. And then if we got funded for both, we could go back to ACCD and ask them to convert that into a housing grant. If our developer of choice goes and says, yes, I'll put in the LMI housing if you're giving me the $5 million to help offset those costs. So we're kind of playing the long game. We're going to put in 2 applications and see what we get. If we get one or the other, we're great. We're able to go. If we get both, we're in really good shape because then we've got the ability to maybe use one for the infrastructure and the other one for the housing. But at this point, what we're going in to ask council for is just some additional funding. These grants, unlike grants in the past that tended to be a little more generic, a lot of grants nowadays, especially these federal grants, really are very specific and people specialize in writing those grants. So do you want to put in your own application or do you want to go and kind of bring in the ringer? And for $5 million, it's $26,000. We think it's a pretty good investment. And if it was a 5% chance, I would have said, no, we're not going to do it. But they seem confident. They put in a lot of these grants. They've gotten them Winooski, Burlington, Killington, lots of places in Vermont that have gotten them. And they've been the authors of them. So that's the push. We're going to go in and talk to council. They're certainly welcome to say no, but that's the big thing. So right now, our big projects are the 2 grants we've got going in. The RFP process is going to be wrapping up next week. So we expect next week to start getting those proposals in. And
Hey, Mike,
yeah,
just that before we go too far, the Department of Transportation, are there any strings attached to that? Or they're just looking to do things and it's just money to do these specific kind of projects to bring housing to downtowns?
Matt, we basically did a divide and conquer. So Matt is doing the grant writing and working with VHB on the build grant, and I'm going to be working on the CDBG-DR with our other grant writer. So I'm not as familiar with the specific conditions, match requirements or those things. I do seem to remember there's some amount, it's a transportation grant, so it's supposed to focus on the transportation, less on the utilities. So I think there is going to be a conversation about shifting, because we do have the $3 million from Northern Borders, to see what percentage we might be able to shift to get both sides covered. It might make it easier for administration later on as well. If everything isn't 27%, 82%, 83%. If you've got it mixed up a little better, it's a little easier.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, so the RFP, we've got 5 applications we're expecting to get on next Wednesday. So yeah, so it'd be what's on the 17th. So it's what, 8-9 days from now. We expect to get 5 applications, and they'll be put online, and there'll be a process where the subcommittee is going to review them. The public can provide comments. There's an entire process that goes along with that. But hopefully that will help to give us a structure of what is possible on the site. I think we're going to get a bunch of very different looks, but just based on the people who are applying. Some of them focus on rentals, some of them focus on home ownership as in their portfolios. Some of them are large buildings, some of them are small buildings. So I think we're going to get a good variety for people to kind of get a sense of what's possible up there. And that process will take time. So even though it's February, I don't think it goes to council until almost April. So there's quite a process and time for everybody to comment. And it certainly is possible if you want for us to put that on a future planning commission agenda to kind of either point them out, highlight them, summarize them for you so you guys have an idea of what's been proposed out there.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I think last meeting, didn't we say that we could also, Aaron, you weren't here, but we could also give, send a letter to city council if all of us kind of like one plan over another with our recommendation.
So that's about it for I think for most of the big, we've got a lot going on right now. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of going on. Grant project. A lot of more mundane things.
I have a question about, well, it is planning related. Well, I am in the right place. The new fish and meat market that opened up on the corner of East State and whatever the bridge. Yeah. So she says that she built the space up in order to make it floodable. So the idea is that it can flood and then quickly resume business. Did anybody in the planning department work with her on like building that up to some standard?
I would have to go and ask them.
Okay.
A lot of the permitting goes through Meredith and
Okay.
folks. I see Meredith came off mute, so I don't know if she's going to jump in or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Just 'cause okay. So because of sort of a quirk in our regulations about, different aspects. A building can be upgraded and a permit closed out. They did a bunch of post flood basic work and repairs after the building flooded when the new owners took over. And then they closed all of that out as they were still working out what was going to happen. And then they, including, they had to, upgrade just the basic utilities and everything. So they closed all of that part out. And then they were able to come in when they had a better sense of what the rest of the design was going to be. And so they are doing it's more of a flood resistant, right? So it's not elevated like our regulations would require for a new building. But they've tried to put in flood resistant materials so that it's easier to clean off, or it's easier to take, materials off those inner walls and get to the studs if they need to, if it floods. It's similar to what some of the first floor commercial spaces did following the flood when they were repairing their spaces. And so, they worked with us, they got their permits, they made sure that all their utilities were elevated, all of any outlets are elevated that they had to put in. And so, any building in the downtown that's in the floodplain that wasn't a state building has come to us for those similar types of permits.
Okay, but she didn't do anything that was different than the other commercial buildings downtown?
No, not really.
Oh, okay. I was
No.
hoping it was gonna be like a
Everybody-
model for what
No,
people could do.
no, it's just they met the regs, right? So lots of people had to change their heat systems, their electric systems, move things up. Positive Pie did a huge rework, and that's one reason their kitchens are all reorganized, because they had to move things out of the basement. So lots of people have done this. People have built new utility rooms on the exterior so it's not in the basement. And that's where they've moved their, changed things to, on-demand hot water can be in a system that's higher up on the wall on the first floor. So
Right.
there's, everybody, they meet, if they meet our regs, like everybody's doing it pretty much.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Nick. Meredith.
Ready for some zoning?
Yeah, all right, let's do it. Next agenda item is continuing work on the zoning amendments. Tonight we are gonna look at chapter 330, additional use standards, and 340 planned unit development standards. I'm assuming, Mike, you're gonna walk us through these ones?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this time I have a voice, so hopefully
Did you not before?
one of the meetings we had,
Oh.
I was trying very hard not to lose my voice. So 330, the conditional use standards. So these are one of the ones that really come up a lot for people when they're talking about the complaints and the extra process. And so I think this very closely ties back, just so you guys all remember, back to our use table. And what is required to get a conditional use? You've got the table. And it has the Ps, the Cs, and the spaces. So if it's a P, it's permitted use. If it's a C, it's a conditional use. And if it's not one of those, it's not allowed. And so permitted uses are administrative, and they can go get issued by Meredith. And a conditional use is one that has to go to the DRB. So over time, what we've been doing is shifting a lot of our residential uses out of conditional use and into permitted uses, because we want to make these permits easier to go through. And for the most part, it hasn't been an issue. Capacity, as I'll show, there's only really 3 standards for conditional use: the capacity of community facilities and utilities. In other words, will your project put too many students in school for the, too many kids in school for this, for the schools to accommodate them, or putting too much wastewater in the system, or those types of questions. Will it stress the police and fire services? For the most part, the answer is no for anything in Montpelier, because our schools have capacity, police and fire have capacity. The streets infrastructure is usually more often addressed in traffic than it is as saying the infrastructure isn't sufficient. Parks and recreation, do we have enough parks and rec? Generally, yes, they're located in a variety of areas. Water supply, sewage disposal. So usually that's always a yes. Then we've got traffic. What Meredith and I think we've mentioned to you, one of our ideas that we've had is to remove traffic from conditional use, because there are still times we want to do traffic studies. We're talking about Country Club Road. The fact that they're residential uses really should be a permitted use. Of course, we want residential uses up there, and whether they're in big buildings or small buildings, the conditional use shouldn't be the issue. The traffic impacts should be studied, but we could take these out of conditional use, and it's also in subdivision. So we would take them out of there and make them a general standard. Remember where we had parking and stormwater and steep slopes? Those were all sections. Those are rules that apply to everybody, but you can have an applicability statement that says only projects that create X number of traffic will be required to do a traffic impact study and have those impacts studied. And then that kind of removes it from conditional use here. We might reference it here and go and say, if it's a conditional use, it's got to go back and see that. But traffic is the second. The third is the character of the neighborhood. And this is the one that always comes up. It's like, we're back to character of the neighborhood or character of the area. And so the third one, these are actually somewhat useful. Now, if we had removed traffic and we kind of take all of the residential uses and make them permitted, then really the only time character of the area is going to come in is just when we're talking about a commercial use. And sometimes character of the area can be very helpful in those instances, because you can go through and be able to look at our mixed use neighborhoods, Northfield Street, Elm Street, Berry Street, even River Street. A lot of these areas, they're a mix of commercial and residential. And we might be able to go through and say, you know what, you want to do a lawnmower repair shop? Okay. And you're on Berry Street? Okay. But we're going to put some conditions on this. You can't be, firing up the lawnmowers before 7 or after 5. Or you want to do a motorcycle repair shop. That's great, but that makes a lot of noise. We're going to look at the character of the area, and we're going to go through and say, we will approve this with these conditions. And the condition is the hours of operation. And you can go through as the RB and go through and say, it's basically takes it into a yes, no, maybe. And the maybe part is really starting to look at those individual. That's okay as long as delivery trucks are not coming in at 2 a.m. I know of stories and cases, because you do this long enough and you start getting things of, somebody's got a home business or a small business that's in a residential neighborhood, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, every 3 days a week, there's a delivery truck that backs into the driveway and beeps all the way in and, drives the neighbors nuts because this is a residential neighborhood. These are what character and conditional use are supposed to look at. It's supposed to give more flexibility. It's a way of giving more flexibility instead of just, yes, it's allowed and no, it's not allowed. There's a yes, it's allowed, no, it's not allowed, but there's actually a maybe in the middle that says, we'll put this in the maybe bucket. And usually it's for these commercial industrial things. And usually in these mixed use neighborhoods, it's usually not an issue in a residential neighborhood or in an industrial park, because it's already designed to mitigate those situations. It's really looking at those mixed use ones. So that's kind of the high level summary of what it is, but we're actually looking, as Meredith and I were talking, we think traffic could and should be pulled out of here because we're going to have cases like Country Club Road, like Sabin's Pasture, where we may want to have a traffic study or may want to require a traffic study, but we don't want to make the uses in that part, in these properties, to be conditional uses. We don't want to check character of the area. We already know those are good because we zoned it that. We called it that to say that's what we want to see, and then to make it a conditional use is kind of counterproductive. So that's what we're thinking about, but big picture, conditional use is not required. It's just allowed under state law. Most communities, some communities will have a bigger list of conditional use standards. So we just have the minimum 3 that are required under state law. And we think this is sufficient for what we're looking at for our few sets of conditional uses that we look at.
So can I make a comment about the
Yes.
character of the neighborhood? Does this language reflect other parts when character of the neighborhood is discussed? Is this like standard character of the neighborhood language?
So in the statute and in the past, character of the neighborhood just said, the project shall not have an undue adverse effect upon the character of the neighborhood.
Now we're defining what character.
Never defining what character of the neighborhood is, never giving any context. And so we plug more in there because we kind of need to give guidance to the development review board. Okay, we got to make this assessment. What does that mean? Now, in this case, which is on the page 3-74, we have character of the neighborhood. We've already talked about, we want to make those neighborhood descriptions future-based, not, and maybe we get rid of them altogether.
Right.
And go to something different. Maybe it's just a district set of standards instead of by neighborhood, by neighborhood, by neighborhood. Maybe it's just a character of the district.
I kind of like that idea.
And that's one idea that's kind of been kicked around when we were talking about that in part 2. We also have the architectural compatibility. That's when those architectural standards come in. And I think we had some discussion when we were talking about the design review district. We could boot all of those if we just go and say, if it's a major site plan, which is the bigger construction projects, then it has to go through design review. And then we could get rid of architectural compatibility out of this altogether.
So, yes, I mean, architectural compatibility, there, here it says, each project should contribute to the character of the neighborhood by designing a unique, distinctive building that reflects the best qualities of the surrounding neighborhood. That's a high bar. Like maybe you just want to build a little house. You know what I mean? Like, does it have to be like the best house in the neighborhood? Like, no,
if your
it's
house
like a
were
nice
conditional
house. How about
use,
nice,
yeah.
a nice one? You know, like it seems like you're asking more of this one new building than what it's surrounded by. And then the height thing, don't we already regulate building heights elsewhere?
Yes, we do. Yep.
So
And scale massing. I mean, there's a lot of things that are regulated in other places. And like you said, the architectural compatibility, yards, lots coverage, landscaping, and the uses. Each one of these is just one we just, we'll have to evaluate as we get there. And once we know what we're doing up front, this kind of goes to that conversation that we were having when we started saying, hey, let's have this education session. It's like, well, if we change things here, we got to change things here. This is one of those pieces. If we change it in major site plan, we might have to change it in conditional use, and we might have to change it in part 2, just to make sure you can't change it in one and not affect the other ones. This is one of those pieces where it's like, hey, if we decide to revisit this and go in a different approach that says the only things that have to worry about architectural are big things that trigger major site plan. And if it triggers major site plan, we probably don't have to look at it in conditional use because it's probably already being covered in major site plan. And then the question sometimes comes up, these are changes of use. So you may have an existing building, you're going to do a change of use. You're not building a new building, but you've got these architectural requirements. You've got the other things that you've kind of just got to go, yeah, well, that doesn't apply. And really, when we're talking conditional use, we really should be looking at the use and its impact on the abutting properties. And I guess that's another big picture planning. When we talk about site plan, you're usually looking inward. How does the site operate? Yes, it's driveway accesses and how do we get people to the sidewalk, but how do people move from the parking lots to the buildings? So site plan is usually looking a little bit internal. It's got very short external, obviously you'll have landscaping and screening. But for the most part, it's really looking at the site itself. Conditional use really tries to look outward. How is this project going to affect that neighbor, that neighbor, that neighbor, that neighbor, that neighbor? And how do we condition it to make sure that it's not going to have these negative impacts? Or maybe we have to deny it. And I think looking at it that way, when we get into the architectural compatibility, you're kind of like, that's not really a that way thing. That's really more of a this way thing.
Well, unless they have to modify the building somehow to
Yeah.
make it appropriate for
But
that use.
yeah, but the conditional use is usually you should be looking at the use and how that use is going to impact its neighbors, those types of things. So some of these changes came in from our regulations from our developer, our consultant that we had. And so.
Yeah, that was my only question, is where the language came from.
Yeah, from theirs. And at the time, it was kind of one of these things where we have up front these architectural standards and we're like, that's great. You put architectural standards up front. I don't know where they apply. How, you've got an architectural standard. It's only useful if it plugs in somewhere in the process. If there's no standard that relates back to it, they're just rules without any way of applying them. And that was when it's like, oh, well, site plan, major site plan, and character of the area for conditional use. And I'll just note for you, Aaron, because you don't know, Alan Goldman has his hand up.
Just a very quick question. Which page are you on, please?
3-74.
Thank you very much.
It may be off by one page or so. I've got the most updated version. So, so yeah, and there'll be a couple of things, little tweaks that I have noted here that I think need to be made to kind of tighten up this section a little bit more. Because under the conditions of approval, it says Development Review Board may require the applicant to mitigate any impacts of the proposed development as a condition of the approval through measures that may include 1 through 5. And they list out some ideas, but really it's proposed development on those three characters. It's not a free for all for the DRB to go through and say, oh, well, it's conditional use. We can require this and that and those. It's like, no, actually, it's just to mitigate those types of impacts. So if you were going to go through and pay for all or a portion of offsite improvements to community facilities and utilities deemed necessary to accommodate the proposed development, that's number one. Well, you'd have to first find that this has a negative impact on that utility or facility. You'd have to go through and say, all right, it's going to have a negative impact on the fire department if we allow this project to happen. So the condition is you need to put in X type of sprinklers, or you need to put in X type of fire hydrants or something, because we need to accommodate the fact that it's has this impact. So hopefully, like I said, it's not long. It's actually pretty straightforward, and it doesn't actually come up as much as you think, because it's mostly at this point those commercial projects, and most of the commercial projects we have are in downtown or in areas that they're permitted uses. So, but again, I think it's been a thing that comes up a lot. People are like, we got to get rid of the conditional uses. And I agree. Well, I think we can remove more and really clean this up and make it just doing what we want it to do, which is to look at those neighborhood impacts on those very specific areas.
And just to reiterate, that's for primarily mixed use areas outside of downtown.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of the downtown is all going to be permitted uses. If you look at the urban UC table, you'll see urban center 1, 2, 3 are all pretty generous.
Yeah. So that's
But
primarily the
It's
gateways.
a worthy process when now that you've seen where it is and you see what goes into that, when we get back to reviewing what do we want to change, it's a good exercise for somebody or a group of somebody's to sit down and go through the use table and just kind of go and say, all right, that's okay, that's not allowed, that's not allowed, that's okay, we wouldn't want those uses. These are permitted, that means they're by right, as long as they meet all the other requirements, we're gonna give them the approval, and these guys here are gonna be conditional, and the question is, yeah, in certain circumstances, I would allow a gas station in this neighborhood, it's a conditional use. Or, no, I actually don't like that as a conditional use, or I don't think I would ever allow that one there. So those are the things to go through. And those are things when we do these annual updates that you'll see, we're going to make an amendment. We're going to change one letter on that table to allow a project to move forward. So the plan unit development standards, my most hated section. So,
Why is that?
we spent so much time working on the plan unit development language. And during the whole process in 2015, 2016, as we worked through these, I just kept saying, they're way too complicated and we're doing way too much work and nobody's going to use them. And for the most part, nobody's used them. And I'll go through and explain. There are a few instances. The two, we actually added two in that actually are pretty helpful. So the first section 3401 are general PUDs. So what's a PUD? Planned unit development. That in the kind of classic conservation planned unit development, what you sometimes do, or even just based on topography or landscape, you go through and say, I've got 10 acres of land. 6 of it are wetlands. So I only got 4 acres left and I'm in the rural district and that's 2 units. That means I can put in I can make two lot subdivision because that's all I've got left. But what the PUD lets you be able to do is to go through and say, well, actually, I've got all the development potential. I just can't build on the wetland. So what if I clustered all of my development onto the 4 acres and built 10 units, 10 lots, or 9 lots with 1 big lot of still owning the wetland? Either way you could do it. And that way I don't lose any of my development potential. It's kind of one of these things you can get to go back to developers. When I was working in more rural towns, it was our ability to kind of go and talk to those landowners about, hey, don't worry about the fact that we've got these wetland rules that say you can't build on the wetlands. You're not losing your development rights. It just means you can't build there, but you can move that development to a good area and make the project work somewhere else. If you've got, and usually in those conversations, it all comes down, as long as you've got perkable soils, or it gives you the ability to go through and say, you're not losing anything. If we tell you there's steep slopes and you can't build on it, you can't build on it, but you can move that development. There's a completely different set of rules that we don't have that's called transfer of development rights, that if you've got a lot of density, you could sell that to somebody else. But we're just talking about being able to cluster on the same parcel and be able to move that development into that spot. So that's kind of a classic PUD. I'm just going to build 10 a little bit less than half-acre lots, and then I can put them all there, keep the wetlands as wetlands, and everybody's happy because we've got all my development rights and we've protected the wetlands. So that's kind of big picture how PUDs work. General PUDs are really just kind of allowing that type of scenario to happen. Or usually when you're doing that, what is required, you need a waiver, obviously, of the size of the parcel itself. You had a 2-acre minimum lot size if you were in the rural. For us, it's easier to talk about the rural because it's really hard to start talking about how clustering if you've got 3,000 square foot minimum lot sizes. So let's just talk the big picture. You got these 2-acre lots. This lets you be able to go and make 10,000 square foot lots and then leave the rest as open. So you obviously need not only to you're amending the zoning almost to go through and do the PUD. I want an exception to this rule on the lot size, but you're probably also going to need exemptions to setbacks, because you're not gonna be able to meet those big setbacks on these little tiny lots. So we're gonna need exemptions to those and those and those and those. And the PUD language basically gives you that flexibility to go to the DRB, and the DRB will go, yeah, that's okay. We'll waive those rules, waive those rules, waive those rules to allow these dimensional things to happen. Parcel size, frontage, coverage, lot size, front and rear, height requirements, all varied dimensions run with the lifetime of the PUD. Building footprint may be waived in the general PUD through section 3002. There's a management for residual density. That's just a leftover, the question of what happens with the leftover. So my example, I had 10 developable units, and then when I cluster them, I only build 8. As the administrator on the zoning side, I don't care who has it, but I got 2 unaccounted for units. Are you going to give them to the homeowners association and they can sell them? Are we going to give them to one of the properties? So all the other properties only get to have a single family home, but this one over here gets to have. Then of course we have new rules now that go through and say you can have 6 units on a single parcel. So a lot of these density ones, and this is going to come up quite a bit, a lot of these density ones are kind of starting to. First of all, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of people who are going to use these because we are so generous with our density. So I'm going to go back to the original rule. We've got general PUDs. I would probably always keep the general PUDs because it's just a blanket set of permissions that say, hey, if you happen to be one of these people that has a lot of land that's locked up in a steep slope or a wetland, we will give you the ability to get out. 3402 is also a new one, and that's a footprint type PUD. And it's a type of condo. So sometimes when you get a condo, you own the space, but you don't own the walls, or you own the walls, but you don't own the outside shell of the building. In a footprint PUD, you'll see a lot of these, especially in resorts, where the building itself sits there and you own that land, that 4-foot strip of land that goes around the building. So it might even be a cottage, a single family cottage, and you own 4 feet around it. But you park in a shared parking lot, you share water, you share recreation facilities, you share everything else. But I own that building and I own the land that it sits on. It's just a different instrument, but it's a legal instrument that exists. So we want to make sure that if somebody did want to create a footprint PUD, they would have the right to be able to do it. And it really lets you make really small lots. So even though we've talked about can't make lots less than 3,000, you might have a lot that's 400 square feet because it's just the building and 4 feet around it.
Is there example of this yet in Montpelier?
Not that I know of for a footprint PUD, but you see a lot of them in Stowe and Cambridge, a lot of things around the resorts because they're popular for timeshares.
Gotcha.
They'll make a timeshare and they'll plunk them up. If you go up the Smuggler's Notch and you have Owls 1, Owls 2, Owls 3, Owls 4, those are all footprint PUDs. So those are really kind of basic enabling ones. But when we get to 03, the infill PUDs and the cottage clusters, we start getting into ones that, especially now that we allow 6 units on a parcel, I don't even know if these are worth it. And the thing I didn't like about these, showing my bias, was they were very, very specific. And in order to get the density bonuses, and I don't know if we want to be giving a 50% density bonus for somebody who's developing on a parcel that already has 6 units allowed. So think about having residential 6,000 lot. You're putting 6 units on it, and then you can do an infill PUD to put 12 units on it. I think we're starting to kind of get to a point where we're like, that might be a little too much But again, it's a policy decision. Do we want to allow density bonuses? And the idea, theory, again, back to a little bit of planning theory. This goes through and says, if you do good design and you do good planning, we will allow you to have more. So if you just want to have a vanilla subdivision, great, meet the rules. If you want density bonuses to have a higher density, you got to meet a higher standard. The issue is most developers that come through, 99% of them will go through and tell you, I want the easiest path from point A to point B.
Can you dumb down the density bonus concept? Explain
Okay.
to me? I've always sort of struggled with it.
So in the past, what you could end up with is, again, I'll think about more of a rural town, think of East Montpelier or something like that. They might set the density to be 1 unit per, we'll keep it with 1 unit per 2 acres. But really the capacity is, it could have a capacity that's higher. So what you might do is have a rule that goes through and says, if you cluster it, not only do you get to cluster it and have to pay less for infrastructure, but try to give you a 50% bonus. So maybe you were only allowed 10 units under regular zoning. But if you cluster it, which is what we want you to do, you'll get 15. So it's kind of an incentive base, which I've always said, if we as the community want 15, let's make the rules allow it to be 15 and make it easy for them to do the 15, because people will always do what's easiest. If what we want and make what you want be the easy thing to do. So as you do your zoning, if you want housing, make it easy. Don't go and say, if you want to do a lot of zoning, we're going to make it hard for you. But that's what we want you to do. It's counterintuitive. I see almost every developer would just go through and say, if it's easy to get 10, I'm going to take 10. I'm not going to do the hard work to do 15 because that's going to open myself up to appeals. And I just want this to go through. I don't need to make this more complicated. And now that we've got densities that are, limitless on a lot of these small parcels, the density bonus kind of goes away. And if we keep these, so we can get rid of these, there's no requirement to have infill PUDs or cottage cluster PUDs. I actually think if somebody wants to do it, it's great, it's nice. I don't think they need a density bonus. But if somebody wanted to do a cottage cluster, and this came up, so cottage cluster, very specific design requirements on page 382. Very specific. And so people came in, developers have come in and just gone through and said, hey, I just don't like that one part of the cottage cluster. And so it looks like we've got Meredith who has her hand raised. So see if she's.
I don't have to speak up now. It was one of those, if you wanted a little more perspective on the density bonus situation, something I've just picked up over the last few years. If the commission would like that. Okay. So we have only had a few PUD applications. None of them have really made it past the sketch review. So the first round review that had been in there required for any kind of subdivision or planned unit development. And I've really only had one that came forward asking for this density bonus and having that discussion. And this was before we had the 6-unit minimum for those parcels with city water and sewer. And so they were looking to get that density bonus. And there was a very big disconnect, or people were, especially the neighbors, were having a really hard time wrapping their head around something being a permitted use. So the number of units being requested was a permitted use, but to get them on this particular parcel, because of the density limits, they needed to use this PUD to get that density bonus. And So there was a lot of discussion between neighbors being very upset and thinking it was going to be too much, too big for the neighborhood. And during the sketch plan review, the board also understanding that if the boxes were checked for that density bonus, the board really felt like they had to approve it when it came back. But there was significant pushback from the neighbors. So it really became a situation where it didn't boil down to what the regs actually would have allowed if the developer had come back and asked the board's approval. It came back to you're letting someone do something that they shouldn't otherwise be allowed to do. Because that bonus part, right, makes people feel like it's just such an exception to the rule. And I think that it does become a situation where also when you have that in there, you are going to get even more of a difficulty with just the viewpoint and how people perceive it, versus just saying, hey, we allow these things, we allow this higher density. It's not a conditional use anymore, right? This is what we want, versus putting in those layers of confusion of, is it really what we want or is it not what the city wants? I'm hoping that makes sense.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, the infill and the cottage cluster, I think are they're optional ones. I think they could go away. And those types of projects could still happen, in my opinion. And so, especially as people are saying, can we simplify the regs? Can we make this document a little bit smaller? These are areas I think that we would have opportunities to do that, or to consider doing that. We may have to go through and make sure in our general PUD. So if somebody did want to do something like that, or did want to have that, we've got the ability to have flexibility in enough areas, like, vehicular access and parking. Is that called out as something that can be waived or varied based in a PUD? So we'll just have to go because those are what you need sometimes with like the cottage cluster. It's designed to, the cottage is really kind of designed to have all the cottages in one small area with the parking commonly owned in the surrounding areas. So everyone doesn't have their own driveway. We're just making a parking lot. That may not fit into a general PUD unless we have a rule that says, oh, by the way, DRB has the right to waive that requirement or to allow that in that way. We just have to kind of double check if we eliminate the specific ones. Are the ideas, because the ideas are good. I think the cottage cluster is a good idea, but we just have to make sure that the rules are flexible enough to allow us to do it. The manufactured home park, which is 5, is kind of required. We're required to have to require mobile home parks, quote, mobile home parks. That was what they were originally called, and they were adjusted to called manufactured home parks. So we are allowed to have them. The only place that you can prohibit them is in a historic district. And the park is different. There's rules for parks and a rule for manufactured homes. I think one is not allowed. One can be not allowed in the historic districts, and the mobile home park I think has to be allowed somewhere in town. And so we have places where these are allowed. I think they're called out in either on the use table or somewhere in there, but they have to be allowed somewhere. And usually what we did is we called them PUDs. It gives a little bit more flexibility if somebody wants to create a mobile home park as to how they arrange them. And nowadays manufactured could be could have more definitions than just trailers. So somebody may do a manufactured home park that are tiny homes. And that would fit that bill. As long as we allow them, then we meet that requirement. Just going quickly through, and then we can kind of talk about them more generally later. The new neighborhood development, this again, each one had a special little niche they were trying to kind of fill. But again, the same idea, with the new neighborhood is this was really meant to kind of get into those infill projects where you've got a piece of land that might be a little bit bigger, and that new neighborhood might even have been a Sabins Pass or a Country Club Road. But again, my recommendation has always been I would rather set the rules. I would rather zone an area what we want to see than to make it low density. And then say, but if you cluster it, we'll give you density bonuses to get. I would rather just go through and say, we want high density here, we want low density there. That's my preference. I think it's just starts to play games when you start going through and doing it. But these were all discussed, and unfortunately they were discussed long times, and I just don't see these generally getting used. They seem great in a concept. In the academic ivory tower of talking about things, they're great ideas, but in the reality, developers don't tend to gravitate to them. 07 is a conservation subdivision. Did I miss one? No, 06 was new neighborhood, 07 is conservation. These are generally residential 9 and rural. These are areas that if you've got a large chunk of land and it has a lot of those wetlands and other things, you can cluster them and you can get density bonuses for doing certain things. Now, again, at the end of the day, most of ours are, this one could be helpful for a rural area, but again, the up to 6 only applies to sewer and water. So we could consider leaving conservation because it's one of the ones that really applies to the rural. And if you wanted to do something and get some bonuses, that would be fine. And then
My only thought with the allowed on any site with significant natural resource constraints, giving density bonuses to places that might have a high percentage of natural resource constraints might negatively impact the natural resources if you add more development to those areas. So I don't know.
You'd be doing the development adjacent to it. But yes, maybe
It'd be-
sometimes putting a higher density adjacent to something is not the correct location to put that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we had issues a little bit when we were talking about these hypothetically for the conservation subdivision in the conservation areas with this minimum 40%, maximum 60% of the total area shall be conserved. Some of these things kind of get a little funny as you start going through it of how you start breaking these things apart. And trying to keep track of where those areas are. I'm trying to remember what were the specifics, but I do remember we were having a hard time with some of those specifics.
Yeah, the 40 to 60 conservation number seems
It was
arbitrary.
Yeah, and it was kind of weird as you started to do it, because I think if you do a certain number, then you'd end up getting kicked in. And maybe we eliminated that because that was one of the issues. I think early on there was a requirement that said if you had a 5-lot subdivision, then you had to go and meet these requirements. And then the question was, all right, how are we counting that? Because you could do a 2-lot subdivision and then the next person does a 5-lot subdivision. Does that boot the first one in? Because or is it only at that time and you just, as long as you do a subdivision, record the plat, a subdivision, record the plat, you can stay out. And it starts becoming very difficult to track. But I think we got rid of that language. But there were still some of these, the minimum, maximum. The campus development, 08, that actually is a useful one. I'm not sure if the college itself is a campus PUD, but this was kind of designed with that in mind. Was you have a set of buildings, you have a set of uses, they share a lot of resources, but it's not really looking at something like like a cottage cluster. It's thinking more of a campus because it's more of a mixed use. Maybe even an industrial park could be a campus. Maybe National Life would want to be a campus. And they would go through and say, we're going to have a campus PUD. We're going to conserve these areas. We're going to have consistent building designs. We're going to have open space that benefits everybody who works there. We're going to have some residential development that integrates to have some work life space. And so this is campus PUD, I think, has some value to it. So as much as I would punch out a couple of these, maybe we keep conservation, maybe we keep campus. Maybe we have to keep the manufactured home park. And then we keep the two general ones and we get rid of infill, cottage cluster and the new development, new neighborhood. It's just considerations again. So as we were talking big picture, this is what these are for. These are special. Organizationally, I never could understand why we have PUDs before subdivisions. We really should have subdivisions. I could talk to you about what subdivisions are and how they work. And PUDs are a special type of subdivision. They're in our book a little bit different backwards, but we'll get to subdivisions at our next meeting. But at this point, that's the different types of PUDs. Again, they're not going to come up a lot, but they add a lot of flexibility to the development in the world. So if somebody's the developer, they may really go through and say, I've got a really cool idea. And you really want to have a few tools that say, this is how you can break the rules. But it's going to a DRB. Neighbors are going to get hurt because you're doing something that is not following the rules. So everybody's going to get a chance to comment on it. And that we can't change. And so Gabe has his hand up.
Yeah, so just a comment. I know consultants that don't know the area, right? They come in and something like this in a really affluent area would make sense, right? Like I do some projects over on the seacoast of New Hampshire and Maine, and if if land costs are super high and you're providing a premium product, then people will do what if they can get bonus density by whatever, adding some additional open space or whatever that is, right? They'll do that because the economics make sense. But Mike, what you're seeing from this RFP process is that, look, it's just too expensive to do anything. Like we need support for almost anything. Like it's impossible to kind of do without, for infrastructure support or other things. So the fact that you're not seeing people use these, it doesn't surprise me, right? The economics of it just don't make sense. I'm hearing from a lot of people, and I think, I'll just say Tim Heaney's he came in and talked to us. He's probably the biggest advocate. People that talk to me are like, well, we talked to Tim and we all heard, like back in the day when he built, that stuff off of Route 12, that it was like a 40-page, manual or something that he had to work through. And, I'm just hearing from a lot of people that are in those discussions that why can't we go to something similar, something really simple. And I think a lot of the things that we've talked about can get us there. This is a great area to reduce a lot of page space that isn't helping us do anything. I'd much rather just, my view is like, let's look at the policy and how we can increase density in like the urban core and let people build there, let people do infill, let people add units and do things there and get rid of some of these, extraneous pages that nobody's ever used. It's just too expensive. And the reality is it's not going to happen. So.
Yeah, a lot of these are bigger if you get down like if you're the planning circles, you're down outside the Beltway in DC and you're out in Maryland, and that's where a lot of these things come in. And again, the same debate kind of comes up. Do you keep low density rules and give incentives to build more? Or if you're going to let people build 27 units an acre, why set it at 14 units an acre and give a 50% or 100% density bonus if you do what we want? Just if what you want is the 27 units an acre, then just say we want 27 units an acre, and then put in whatever requirements you want to mitigate those. What are the impacts you don't want to see happen? Well, we don't want to have the buildings too big, or we don't want. Well, then let's look at the bulk and massing requirements, and then in some cases, people do want to get into those architectural standards, and that can be just a matter of discussion. Like we were talking about, we've got design review rules. If a building is over a certain number of square feet or whatever we set as the trigger, then all right, now it's a major site plan, and now it has to go through design review, and maybe up to 6 units, that was our conversation, would be exempt from major site plan. So therefore, we're not going to have these architectural standards applying to those unless, excuse me, unless you're in the historic district, which everything in the historic district needs to go through design review. But most of that's built out, so that's less of an issue. So I think we can come up with rules that can work. Again, I think there's a lot. I know Tim and I disagree. We're kind of, I don't even want to say we're on polar opposites, because we're not. I mean, I just, there's just a reality of where the world is today. From a
No, I'm not advocating for a 40 page. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is like, look, if we can reduce a lot of noise that's, if it's 250 pages or 200 pages or something, not that obviously we want to give Meredith the tools that she needs to make as many administrative decisions as she possibly can make. Like that is our goal, right? Let's get as much housing built as we can get built. But I think there is some feeling like it seems like a simple answer, and it resonates with people. And so I'm just saying this is a good area. You could maybe get rid of a lot of volume in the regulations.
Yeah. Yeah. This was one area. I agree. That's one area. I was just going to point out that was just, his name has come up a couple times tonight about, really wanting to go through and really hack into the zoning. It's just not, my opinion. I mentioned this. I talked to Alyssa and I've talked to the housing committee. Starting over with zoning is a really bad idea. And a lot of these are in place. We'd be a lot better off finding out where the issues are and making amendments to the existing document that we have. Because a lot of the things we had is we had a set of zoning that had been used for 10, 15 years. It had problems. Mostly it didn't match what was on the ground. Everything was non-conforming. We could have made those adjustments and kept the same framework because we'd already gone through and corrected all those little technical things. When we rewrite it, we ended up with all these things like, oh, now we got this technical thing that doesn't work, or this setback that isn't measured appropriately, and we got to keep making these amendments. I think we will get there by making these amendments, and I think this is one of those areas, and I think we talked a little bit in the specific uses. I thought there are things in the specific uses. I think we have 7 pages on how to build a wireless telecommunication tower. I mean, it's like a giant section is this wireless telecommunication tower, of which we've had 0 applications for because they stick them on buildings. They go to National Life, they stick them on National Life. No, there aren't any on this building, which always surprised me, but they're in the church steeple, one of the church steeples. They hide them all over the place because it's just a lot easier to get your state permit. You got to get a state permit anyways, and the state's going to go through and say, yeah, we like that, we like that, we like that. So you stick it on an existing building, it's easy for them. So that's what they do, and it works for Montpelier. So yeah, I think this is a good place we can reduce text, and I think that's another place we can look to reduce text. And after we finish subdivision, part 4 is another place to talk a little bit about it, because a lot of what's in part 4 are the administrative procedures, which isn't that long. It's actually pretty short, but a lot of it is restating state law. So we could certainly shorten that up if we wanted to go through and say, public hearing shall meet the public hearing requirements as laid out under statute. If you want to find it, here's where it is. So
I really like the idea. I think coming into this process, the idea of kind of throwing it out and let's make it 40 pages again is very appealing. And at the same time, I think what we're doing right now is our version of hacking away at it. We are going through all of the details. I think that when this is all said and done, will the reduction be 100% reduction? I mean, a 50% reduction? No, it likely won't be. But where we are headed in terms of permissibility and what is allowed in terms of density, what are our zoning districts, what are there, like there's a lot that we're working on currently that at the end of the day will be, in my opinion, pretty significant changes for the better to allow for a lot more housing development to happen here. So even though the number of pages isn't likely to change drastically. It will hopefully be reduced and not increased. The impact and the effect of the work that we're doing should be, I don't want it, revolutionary for Montpelier.
Yeah, I think the measure, I think what you're getting, what you're getting at, a little bit of the metric is the metric shouldn't be how thick the document is. The metric should be, when we started before 2018, we issue 140 permits a year. I've mentioned this before. 70 of them, 50% of all permits went to the DRB. Half of all permits had to go through a public hearing process, notify your neighbors, go through that process. That's a lot of work for us and a lot of work for developers. Because every one of those has additional requirements that they have to go through. The 2018 zoning kind of got us down into the 20s. So we went from 70 down to 20. And then we got that, into the low 20s. Then we got it down to 20, down to 17. We're down to 14. And a lot of those we came in early, last summer when we were talking about this. We're like, all right, what are these 14 permits? And it's like, well, this was a sketch plan. This was a preliminary site plan. This was a subdivision for a 2-lot subdivision. And we were like, wait a second here. 14 applications, and we could get rid of 6 of them by making administrative site plans. Or administrative subdivisions for these small subdivisions, which we did. It's an interim change. So, I mean, I think the metric is going to be, because each time you shorten these, we get ourselves, the developer gets a faster permit, because every time you don't have to go to a board means Meredith or Nick is going to look at the application, review whether it meets the standards, and hand it off to go through and say, yeah, this meets the requirements. You have a 15-day appeal period, as opposed to you got to wait 15 days to have your public hearing before we issue a permit that has a 30-day appeal period.
Right.
So it just tremendously shortens up the process if we can get ourselves down to what are the ones that really need to have a DRB hearing, and make sure those are going to the hearings, and find out which are the ones that are like these, sketch plans and these little things don't need to be going to the DRB.
Administrative.
And so I think that's the metric to look at is at the end is how quickly we kind of roll these things in and out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just say it's really helpful to hear from you an admission that all this work that you've done with the PUD section. I mean, I'm sure, like, just looking at it, I know that I can tell that you guys, it was arduous to say the least, and to prefer you to admit that it's not doing what you thought it would do and might be worth getting rid of. I just want to recognize that that's hard to do.
These were very long planning commission meetings that were really, 2015, we were reviewing these things, and I did just shake my head and say, just we need to get this to public hearing, and we're nitpicking in every dimensional. Well, maybe this could be this, maybe this could be this, and is that going to make a difference? What about this? But at the end of the day, I'm like, nobody's going to do it. Move forward.
But good.
I'm just gonna say, I think that dovetails into the conversation we were having with the housing committee. It's this idea that if hopefully we're gonna get some sort of these kind of life cycle analyses of these projects, and hopefully we'll get more of a few iterations of that.
Yeah.
We'll really sort of be able to tease out where the friction is, with the developers and these regulations, and we can really drill down on those and figure out, from a policy perspective, how, what do we prioritize? How do we make this administratively more, streamlined? And I think we can get there. If we have the challenge for me over the years has been, this is all very academic. And I think if we can all sort of see some real world examples that are contextualized from sort of like cradle to, execution, it's going to be helpful to us. And really, I think we'll have a better grasp on it.
Totally. I was just going to add, though, the fact that it's been in our planning, our zoning documents for the past decade. You had a hunch going when you were going through the process. Now we're a decade in. Now you have experience with it as well. It is iterative. So there are portions that are going to be added in that you spend time with, and then it continues to evolve. It's dynamic. They can get added to, removed. So I think it's just part of the process. But I also appreciate the yeah, sort of the willingness and openness to that change right now.
I think that's it. Are we?
Yeah, that was it for PUDs. So
Okay.
if people have other questions or thoughts, I'm always open to hearing them. We have, the next thing we will have, and that'll be the last section, is the subdivision. And again, I don't know how much we're gonna go through chapter 4. We can give a brief, if we get through subdivision fairly quickly, we can go through a little bit of chapter 4 next time, and chapter 5 is just definitions. I don't think we need to go through definitions, but obviously they're necessary. They're the things that Meredith had to keep going back to make sure we, a use is defined and we've got that all clear. And so most of the uses are pretty straightforward. But we'll also admit the subdivision regulations, subdivision chapter is one of the chapters that we have always flagged as staff as being one that's problematic. So again, we had a consultant helped us write the zoning. They came in with this new zoning, and I was trying to be professional. This is their consultant. They had hired them before I came online, and before I was hired. And so I tried to work with her, push back in certain areas, and some of the rules she was bringing with her were a little bit more designed for more suburban, a little less urban. And so some of the rules, especially like subdivision standards, really were kind of geared towards Colchester, South Burlington kind of feel. And so when we tried to apply those to ours, most of our subdivisions are these 2-lot, 3-lot subdivisions in a very urban area. And you're talking about sidewalk standards and all these things. You're just like, so we have always kind of recognized, like we said, when these were adopted, we're like, there are things that need to get fixed. And when we adopted in 2018, the design review rules, we went through and we got those fixed. Sign regulations I thought were bad, and we got those fixed. And so we've been kind of going through site plan rules needed to get cleaned up a lot. We've cleaned up those a lot. There's maybe one left, I think we pointed out. They're like, that one doesn't really needs to kind of get fixed. But subdivision standards is one of those that's been kind of sitting out there as, so we may, again, we don't want something to hold up the process. If we get through a big chunk and this is going to take another 4 months, there'll be a decision you guys will have to make. Do we take the extra 4 months, or do we get this adopted because it's important to get the big things fixed, and we'll come back and do the subdivision standards. But it's another one, like we said, the signs and all these other ones, we've been like, we got that one, check. Subdivision is another one that we'll have some comments on next time that we're like, yeah. And I think if you were to review it and look at like the design and layout if necessary for streets, and those things are really very suburban, and we're pretty kind of urban. And so we'll have to talk about those. So that's it for next time.
Great. Last item on the agenda is adjournment.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Got a motion. I didn't second it. All those.
I second.
Adjournment. Oh.
Everybody's trying to get in here now.
Anyone who wants to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone who wants to say nay. We're adjourning.